Women's Archive. So first, Betsy. Betsy, who's sitting right here, is a performance artist and an environmental activist. She was founding member of the Women's Caucus for Art and the Feminist Art Studio at Cornell University in 1973. In 1984, she founded No Limits for Women Artists Workshop, a support system that became a national organization for women artists. Beginning with the creation of Keepers of the Water in 1991, Betsy has continued to work towards creating community-based models of water stewardship. Her work includes sculpture, teaching, writing, designing, lectures, and workshops. One of her best or most well-known project is the Living Water Garden, which we'll talk about at the end of this presentation, an urban-based ecological park in Chengdu, China. And that was completed in 1998. Betsy is hard at work at her next book, which is called The People's Water, which will be published this coming fall. So we are delighted to have Betsy here with us. Next, I'd like to introduce Ceci Woo. Ceci is an artist, first and foremost, but also an incredibly diligent member of the Asia Art Archive in America group, team, family. She has really spearheaded this project. She's worked with Betsy very closely. She has digitized the slides. She has annotated the slides, identified them, and then worked with our colleagues in Hong Kong to put them up online, which they were put online last night at 2 a.m.
Just turned live.
So Betsy will be, Cici will be working on this. So anyway, so start with the first slide.
Okay. So before we start the slides, I'm just gonna give a really short introduction to this research collection. So we started preparing Betsy Damon archive in February 2017. The core of this research collection is documentation of the 2 iterations of Keepers of the Waters that took place in Chengdu, Sichuan 1995, and Lhasa, Tibet 1996. The whole archive comprised of 334 slides, 9 audio-visual recordings, 10 newspaper clippings, and several interviews. So besides the interview with Betsy Damon, we also conducted several interviews with artists such as Lin Xiuzhen, Song Dong, Dai Guangyu, and many more. And each of them had different perspective to unfold the narrative of Keepers of the Waters. So I would love to start the presentation from early practice of Betsy Damon. So Betsy started as a performance artist, and this image showed a performance piece that she did in 1979 in New York, in Wall Street. And it's called Blind Beggar Woman. Do you want to talk a little bit of this work?
I gotta stand up.
Yeah.
So I had done the 7,000-year-old woman, and the costume is the leftover bags from being cut off. And I asked myself, where are the women storytellers? Who is the woman Homer? Who is the tale teller? And I couldn't think of any woman, even though I've read a lot of fairy tales and things like that. So I went out and I begged people for the stories from their life. And I could talk a long time. I did it many places.
And in 1983, Betsy went a trip across the states with her children. And here the image showed a dry riverbed. And she painted on the river.
No, it's paper poured on them. It's paper pulp made from the, some of it's made from the vegetation right there on the site. And that's an awful lot to make, so I also bought some. But paper is liquid, so you can do that.
And this is the starting point of she realizing kind of this transition from the interest of a female storyteller to a keeper of water. Do you want to elaborate a little bit?
Well, I was
how you got inspired from this trip and the dry riverbeds.
Well, I saw all these dry riverbeds across the United States that I hadn't seen when I was a child. When I went across the United States with my family, you know, we stayed places, but there was water everywhere. And I went across the United States and all the riverbeds were dry. They're beautiful because, you know, water carves the rocks and everything. So first I was like, well, they're like dinosaur bones. And then I realized it was from the damming of the rivers in the United States. And that had all happened since 1965. And I didn't register how bad it was till from No Limits, I asked a carload of paper makers I was with in Canada, what would you do if you had, you know, all the money and time and you could do it? And they told me, and then they asked me the question, and I immediately said, I can't do what I want. And they said, I want to cast 250 feet of a dry riverbed in paper. And they stopped the car, and going from 80 miles an hour, it stopped. And they turned around and they said, you can do that and we'll help you. So they helped me. We were 10 people out there for a month.
And here is a quotation. I just thought the whole universe is patterned by water and I don't know anything. So I decided to give my life to it. So there certainly was a time that Betsy committed to the theme of water in her whole life. And in 1991, she founded Keepers of the Waters.
Can you tell a little bit about Keepers of the Water?
Well, yeah, while casting the riverbed, you know, you're this close, right? And I looked at the sky and the stars were that far away, but they looked just like the stones in the riverbed. So that's when I realized, I went, oh my gosh, I don't know anything, and the world is totally created by water. So, and Keepers of the Waters was, well, I was like, okay, that's such a long story. I'll put it in a few words. So what could I do that would not pollute the world as an artist? What can I do? Mm-hmm. And how could I do it? I had to change from making an object to the water to me being in the water. So that's when I founded Keepers of the Waters. And my one contribution was, if water creates all life, it must be the foundation of planning and design. And in fact, that's a truth that we forgot. Mm-hmm. We have forgotten it. So then that started Keepers of the Waters. That we're all Keepers of the Waters. And how can I invite people to become that with me? I guess that's the best I can say.
And Keepers of the Water is kind of is an initiative. It's a sort of an umbrella organization under which or around which you have done lots of projects.
Well, it's a project of something that's my not-for-profit. It's called the Institute for Releasing Initiative. And so No Limits for Women Artists was in that not-for-profit, and this was in that not-for-profit. Mm-hmm. And I don't believe in curating. When I was a feminist, I didn't curate any shows. I had open shows. Everybody could show, and everything was shown, and every new thought. I mean, a new thought is raw. It's not generally, it's sort of an evolved aesthetic, and that's what was happening in the women's movement in the United States, was enormous rawness. And I don't see many images that are much different than what we were doing back then now. You know, but there's a new rawness now because something's happening. It's very interesting. But so that was my philosophy, and
in 1995 and 1996, Keepers of the Waters took place in Chengdu and Lhasa with the assistance of artist Dai Guangyu. Dai Guangyu is a performance artist based in Chengdu, and anthropologist Zhu Xiaofeng, and he was also based in Chengdu at that time. So they kind of helped Betsy to organize the whole thing to happen in China.
So the question is, Betsy, always the initial question is, why China? Here's a woman wandering around the United States, casting dry riverbeds, and instigating, catalyzing projects around women's issues, and then you find yourself in China. This is very...
No, it wouldn't happen that quickly, but...
so, how and why China?
how can I say, less than 10 words or less. I was in China in '89. I was there when Tiananmen Square happened.
Wow.
My son fell in love with China. I went back to be with him. And then things happened to me, just things that aren't normal. Introductions on streets, and just a man who was studying a sacred water site to see if the medicinal water really did do good things, and found that it really did, and I wanted to visit it. And so that's how I ended up there. I got another grant. And Zhu Xiaofeng was, in 1993, I met him in a conference, the first conference for the
93.
Yeah, the first conference for the environment put on by the Chinese, not put on by a Western World Bank or universities, but put on by Chinese. There were Qigong masters and engineers in the same room. I have never learned that much about water from any time since or before. So that's how come. That was the lynch.
And Zhu Xiaofeng was involved in that conference.
Zhu Xiaofeng was involved in the conference. Dai Guanyu was the only person who would step forward to talk to me in '95. And then slowly they wrapped in other people.
Yeah. We invited several artists there.
Yeah.
I know that there are quite a number of Chinese in this room, so this map will certainly be very familiar to you. But there may be a few people in this room who are not Chinese and may recognize the map of China, but may not know exactly where Chengdu and Lhasa are on this map. Just so that everybody knows, this is Beijing, Shanghai, we have Guangzhou and Hong Kong, where Asia Art Archive is. And one of the things about the history of art, and everybody comes at this archive and comes at this project with different perspectives, but as an art historian, to me it is extremely interesting, and I don't know how many of you went to see the show at the Guggenheim Museum recently called Theater of the World. And there was quite a lot of performance art in that exhibition, at least through documentation and photographs, but I'd say all of it took place in either Beijing, Shanghai, or Guangzhou. And those are three major cities that most people in the United States are very aware of. And many of those projects that you saw at the Guggenheim Museum, including Ai Weiwei dropping urn, took place in 1995. But in Chengdu, which is where Betsy was, and in Lhasa, performance art was also happening. And I think what's really interesting from my perspective is that this actually complicates the story a bit about performance art in Asia. And as I think we will see, tells a very different kind of story about the community engagement or the environmental atmosphere of performance art in Asia. So here we are, sitting under the Bodhi Tree, sitting over a tree.
This is the first meeting of Keepers of Waters in Chengdu under the tree. Betsy, do you want to talk a little about...
Well, this is Zhu Xiaofeng, and that was my assistant. I brought an assistant with me. And
this looks really relaxing.
Well, yeah, we didn't know what to do or where to go. We really did not know, okay? We did not know. We sat under this tree. Like, his idea was we would go to a remoter place than Chengdu and do something, which is what the avant-garde artists were doing. They'd go to the countryside and create and send photographs of their work out to the world. So we're sitting under this tree, and we're all imagining that we're in the Tang Dynasty. And one of us is a poet, and another person's a writer, and we're taking our roles and just sitting there talking. And then I always go to the practical. Well, we could actually do something there. We could clean up this. We could do. So that's what we did on this visit. And this is a town that's been preserved, and I've forgotten the name, Hong something, south of Chengdu, and it's preserved back to the 17th century. Mm-hmm. So you're in that. You're there. And at that time, they hadn't built big hotels for tourists or anything. You could just be there.
This is a map, a poster actually, for the whole event. So here it says Keepers of the Waters, and this is like a general information of Chengdu. I guess this is a map of where the performance, the events.
So here are the rivers. You can.
Well, the Chengdu is surrounded by two rivers. They connect the two up there, but the whole city was inside those rivers with a wall around it. And they were called in the old day Jinjiang, which meant bright. But the merchants would wash their silk in the river for it to get brighter. At 49, it became Funan. They've now gone back to Jinjiang. So that's and at that time, most of the city was very much contained within that. It now has many more ring roads and the
Chengdu is a
population.
city of 14.5 million people, so
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
almost twice the size of sort of the 5 boroughs here.
Yeah, it was 8 million when I started. But living in very small places, there wasn't fancy hotels. The biggest hotel, which is owned by the government, was right here. And the English-speaking corner was right there. So that's where we did everything.
And Betsy, you were staying at Jinjiang Hotel.
No.
No,
That
you
was the
didn't.
fancy hotel.
That's a fancy hotel. We were staying in the guest house at the university, where we could stay for $5.
Wow.
Everyone lived on $5 for everything.
One of the things going through this archive, because obviously we've spent a lot of time, I've spent a lot of time looking at different archives and looking at different projects in China during the 80s and 90s, which actually is the subject of a lot of my own personal research. One of the things that jumped out at both Cici and me when we were looking at this material is how community-based it was, which is, I think, not something you often see with work in China. That it was very much engaged in the city and in the local community, and it was also interdisciplinary, meaning there were people from outside of the artist community that were brought in and were engaged in the various different activities as they unfolded.
So here is the image of the parade of Keepers of Waters. I want to read the quotation. The parade, as it has by Jinjiang Hotel, this kind of demonstration organized in the name of art, had never before been witnessed in Chengdu. Along the way, the artists distributed materials to raise environmental awareness. This is a quote from Gai Guangyu, the performance artist who helped organize, also participant in the event. And here it says Funan River Water Protection Art Week. And here it says sponsor unit, like Danwei means company or unit, is Keepers of Waters from America. And here it says actually from the city. So it's kind of like, the city supported and sponsored.
So it's the Chengdu Environmental Protection Center for Promotion and Education, or Education and Promotion Center, was the other sponsor of this exhibition, or this event, this festival.
It must be really hard to get permits.
So talk about the hotel water problem. Speaking of water.
Speaking of water, well, yeah, but first I'm going to say I went to China with no permit and no sponsor. I went a tourist visa. They would have never given me a visa if I'd said I went to do public art for the environment. So, so for 6 weeks we had no sponsor. Where can you meet? You can't. And anyway, they broke rules and changed things, and the EPA there let us be in their headquarters. And 2 days before this, we were about to give up because we had no permission to do anything, and we had to have permission. So and then everyone just fell in, created everything, and that's how that happened.
So you eventually got permission, and Dai Guanyu and Zhu Xiaofeng and various people were working behind the scenes.
It turns out that it's Zhang Shui's mother. Her aunt was head of water quality for the city.
Oh.
So it's very complicated how it happened. I couldn't possibly tell you. Zhu Xiaofeng was in there on it. Okay, so the place we were staying thought that we were doing a demonstration against the university because we didn't have any hot water in our rooms. So I got a phone call and they saying, "Are you upset with us? What's your demonstration?" Anyway, and people had to learn. They had to learn the history of the river. They had to learn the water quality. We brought water quality testing things, and 2 scientists came with me who know how to do that. And so here they're showing people, how you look for signs of life in the water. And all the schools asked us for all kinds of stuff too. So
you said that you gave testing, that people came to you and asked for some testing?
They asked for anything we could say about the environment, any material, posters, books, it didn't matter.
And Chengdu had already identified this problem in their community, in their river. I mean, they were interested in that.
Well, they had the only 5-year plan that was a green plan, and it was opposed by Beijing. They're the only one in the whole country. So I walked into a situation where something was possible, people were looking for possible, and they didn't know what to do. And so that had a lot to do with us getting permission. But what they told me is that we thought you were a spy, we thought you were a missionary. And then we realized you came to do something good, and you even had the money to do it. So they broke their rules. So this is Dai Guangyu.
These titles are long abandoned water standards. So Dai Guangyu basically put everyone's photos in a tray that's filled with polluted water.
Yeah, that was eating our photographs away.
And so over the course of the 2 weeks.
Yeah, over the course of the 2 weeks, Dai Guangyu also performed serving the tea that's made by the polluted water to the audience. And the audience are actually ordinary people in the city. And they all refuse, of course, they refuse to drink the tea. But yeah, this is one of the pieces that actually in the event.
And what was going on in the
and on the board he has all our photographs, and then he has statistics about water quality around the world and what's happening, and there, where there's not enough water, what's going on. And he asked the public to sign it, and eventually a high government official signed it. And so we all knew we had won some kind of battle, I don't know, but it was very significant, very significant.
Other aspects of this project seem to me to be the fact that it was extremely collaborative. And Betsy, perhaps you can talk about the kinds of meetings or the kinds of sessions you've had and how the process of coming up with ideas unfolded.
Okay, everyone had to come to a meeting once a week, and in the beginning they learned information about the river and other things like that, and eventually they all had to start saying what they wanted to do, and that was actually hard to get people to share with each other. What was actually hard was to get a Beijinger to talk to a Chengdu person. I mean, people only wanted to talk to people they knew. And I did a rather humorous thing, which is, because they wouldn't even say hello to me. Nobody would say hello, and go to my seat, sit down and leave. And I said, it's really strange, you don't say hello to anybody. But when we walk in a room, we go hi and we give each other a big hug. I lied. And so pretty soon everyone was hugging me. And then my son, who was, 25, tall and blonde, said, well, what about me? And so for 2 hours, people laughed and hugged. And after that, we were a group. And we ate together, we went swimming together, we went on tours together. And they had to come up with ideas that they all shared, and they had to figure out how to spend the money with each other.
So what's interesting, you said there was a budget, and then everybody had to determine together how to spend that money.
Yeah, they knew there was a certain amount of money. It was $6,000 or $7,000 or $5,000, I can't remember, some 5 and 7. And there was one man who wanted 40% of the budget. And they tried to talk him down and say, do something else. And he was fine that he didn't get to do his piece. He helped everyone else. But people had to figure out, okay, we'll spend money on that and that and that. But all together, what's meaningful here? And also, the city pitched in and gave sites and equipment for free, and people volunteered and helped out. It was like a huge, dark thing lifted off the city when we got permission. And all kinds of people contributed.
Here is a little moment of artists making posters together. And the poster is actually for the parade. So these artists are kind of special because they're actually Tibetan artists. At that time, a lot of Tibetan artists in Chengdu.
No, I met them in Lhasa. And I told them about the project and flew them down to Chengdu.
I know one artist or two artists here. One is Suri Lamu and one is Ansang. And so they were making the logo of Keepers of Water. So here it says, Xinjiang River, can we wash in silk? And this is one of the pieces that's collaborative among 8 artists, and it's led by Kristen Caskey. This is the opening ceremony, and 8 artists collaborate together, they walk along the river, and then eventually they wash the white silk in the dirty river water.
Yeah, we have film of them standing in the river. Never thought to put boots on them, just gloves. It was very polluted water. Anyway, the silk turned gray, and the government was standing on the edge of the river clapping and cheering. And then from then on, we were on CCTV, so much so that when I was in the streets of Beijing, people recognized me.
And this is the handmade poster for this piece. It's China-America collaboration, Xinjiang River Washing Silk performance. And at the last sentence of this poster, it says, could you tell us more about the beautiful stories about this river, right? Yeah. And it kind of goes back to Betsy's storytelling. Yeah, but they, the Chinese offered that up a lot. They collected stories. And I did have to, and I'll say this, is that I had to say, this is not, to the artist, this is not your opportunity to criticize the government. And I did use the word, say a fuck you to your government. I said, you can't do that. If you do that, I will leave and we will do nothing. So you have to figure out something that will educate, inform, invite, be constructive. And even if it's about the mess it is, you still have to be constructive. So that was the one direction that was necessary to do anything.
And the other aspect is, I think, was quite unique, or not necessarily unique, but very special and important to underline, with the site specificity of quite a number of the projects.
Yeah. This is a piece by Wang Peng called The River. He basically hung the clay pots off the bridge. And
go ahead.
Well, Betsy she told me the story. So Wang Peng got these pots from the market. Someone gave to him.
Yeah, loaned them to him. He had to give them back.
And the concept of this work is basically you can only make the fish survive in the pots.
But the water was so polluted that the only clean water was the water that was hanging, that was in the pots that were hanging from the bridge. Yeah. Is that right?
Yes, but there are not really any fish in those pots.
Oh, they're definitely in the pots.
And in the whole...
I asked him.
Each of the artists, they make several pieces. So this is only one of the pieces made by Wang Peng. And another piece very similar to this is by this artist called Zhang Shengquan, Da Tong Da Zhang. This is in Lhasa in 1996. And it's called Sweeping River. And so before we talk about this piece, let's watch a clip.
Yeah.
That's the first one. 第二个就是那个，就是我们第一天去看那个地方，就是那个水闸，就是拉萨大学旁边水闸。我准备用那个粗的麻绳闹成那个绞索套，绞索套10个从那个铁栏杆往下挂，10个水闸有10个水道，然后挂在中间，就表明就说是我们掠夺水资源，但是反过来呀，我们自己也深受其害。
那上面还挂人吗？
Yeah. Well, about 5 of the artists carried a sheep and for 3 hours debated the life of the sheep. Do they kill it? Do they carry it? What's their responsibility? And so it was.
That was another one of Da Zhang's pieces.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about Da Zhang's art?
Well, I don't know how many people know this artist.
Do you know him?
Sadly, he passed away. He actually committed suicide. But he is revered by many people who did know him as a very pure individual, and an incredibly intelligent and important spirit that unfortunately took his own life on either it was a New Year's Eve or the day of the first day of the millennium, and that was not a coincidence. So it's a very tragic story, and yet he was obviously an incredibly talented and important.
He did a wonderful piece where he stood on a stepladder and he's in bandages and he's tied to the tree and the tree is feeding him. And I did another piece right near him.
The other, we can, anyway, one of the really very important things in Sundong's in that project, in Lhasa, the Lhasa iteration of the project, and Sundong and Isho Zhen, and this is Isho Zhen's work, we've interviewed both of them about Dajan, because this project, this piece that Betsy was referring to, the carrying the lamb, the sheep across the river, was hotly debated, and Sundong was very much part of that debate, and he feels very strongly and actually very sad about it. So anyway, another aspect of this archive is that there's a lot of performance art. It's very performative, and the performance art is out in the city, in the midst of the public. Here's a very famous piece by Isho Zhen, called Washing the River, a piece that she has continued to do in different iterations, even up to the present day. But this was the initial piece that was done for this festival. I think a lot of people have seen this piece many times, but did not really realize that it was done in the context of this a festival or this project to raise awareness about water that included other work. Here's a piece, here's a film, video.
This is river water that she made it to ice. It's very polluted.
So these are blocks of ice of the river water that she invites the public to wash.
Sorry.
And it took 3 days for it to melt, and it became a site of speeches and poetry and reading.
And you said before, you referred to something called the English Corner. Was this at the English Corner?
No, but it was near the English Corner.
And that's where people would assemble to speak and practice their English. But look at these wonderful people really working very hard to clean.
And all the people were like, shame on you, I should put that ice in my own to make it cooler, and little children wanted to eat it, so we had to have a guard there 24 hours.
This is Isho Zhen, the artist. This little girl, which I'm worried that she's going to put her hand in her mouth. Then there's going to be a man who's going to speak in. So whoever speaks Sichuanese around here can translate.
大家都应该做点什么。不管你是干什么，我们呢是搞艺术的吧，可以这么说。所以我要用艺术的方式来体现这
Here
种
she
和平
says,
的
oh,
热爱。
everyone should do something for our city. And because I am an artist, I just want to use my artwork to contribute to the city. And I think that's really rare at that time to hear from an artist. And this is another piece by Isho Zhen. She was sitting on a mirror. It's called A Piece of Sky. Another piece by Dai Guangyu called Listening in 1996.
He did a whole prayer thing, taking a step and prostrating himself to get into the river.
And here's a piece that everybody knows, probably. Most people who have studied Chinese contemporary art. It was shown at the Guggenheim Museum. It was also shown at the Metropolitan Museum when their exhibition called Ink Art. This took place in Lhasa during the Keepers of the Water in Lhasa in 1996. And I want to show you the next slide from our archive. Here's he's doing it next to this big wall. It's very interesting when you see performance art that you've seen over and over from a certain angle, from a certain form of photograph, and then you see the context in which he was actually doing.
And that's ice cold water. He spent 2 hours doing it.
Think about it, how cold that water would be.
This is another really happy piece. One Wheeled River have fish and shrimp calling of ducks by Liu Chengying in Chengdu 1995. So basically he made, I think, 10 posters with bamboos, and at the back of the poster there were like Chinese characters displaying the titles, and he got 10 ducks, and then he kept them, and I'm 20 or 10, and I think he wants to save their lives, right? I'm not so sure about the narrative of this piece. Betsy, you can talk a little bit.
Well, what I remember is that they had water quality signs around their necks, and he was going to let them go down the river. But we had the largest rainstorm they'd had in 50 years in the middle of all this. So, and we were joking that we made it rain, but so the ducks, he had to sort of take them out and rescue them, but also the ducks in the market have broken feet. So there's probably no way they could really survive. Only 2 of them actually survived. And we took them for dinner.
You ate them?
I couldn't eat them. We were all agreed we couldn't eat them, but
They just accompanied you to dinner.
they accompanied us down to this. I don't know. I thought the Chinese, they did whatever they did.
Anyway, so we rescued these from them. Again, very participatory, as we've been seeing. I mean, a lot of these categories we could apply to a number of the works that we've already seen. But, the inviting of community participation in the works. Here's one that is really quite incredibly moving, and this happened towards the end of the
This
Lhasa.
was the very end. This was in the evening of the last day.
Just to repeat, because we're so close to this material, sometimes we leave out big details. But there were 2 iterations, one in 1995 in Chengdu and another in 1996 in Lhasa. And a group of artists, different groups of artists, but some overlapping artists, worked on both. Zhang Lei, one of the people in our audience right here, she participated in the Lhasa iteration. But this is the last piece, and maybe we could show the film, which is, these are all Tibetan artists. Betsy, maybe you could talk a little bit, because this was a bit of a surprise to you.
Total surprise. I always knew that they were planning something, but they never said what they were planning. And so they did this whole thing. There were other pieces that showed up also that were unplanned. And at the end of it, we had a big lamb roast. Everybody ate and was together and around the fire in the dark. And so that was their way of saying, okay, this is where we live.
Mm-hmm. As you mentioned, so there are always 2, never the same 2 people.
Yeah, only 2 Tibetans would come to the meetings.
So you would come to the planning meetings. You would, even in Tibet as well as in Chengdu, you had planning meetings.
I had planning meetings. Cheng remembers them. We had them up on the top of a Tibetan guest house in the porch there. But the Tibetans would only show up 2 or 1 at a time. Mm-hmm. And I think that we were very, very, very watched. I mean, I was very, very watched in Chengdu too, but in Tibet even more so. And I'm not sure why they let us do this, but they let me. And so I knew that they were planning something, and I knew that we would not know about it.
And so this happened in the afternoon?
That began in the afternoon, went all through the evening. But there were other pieces that were done also by various people who we can't identify, you know.
Yeah, I heard from Suvan here, like an artist in this Lhasa event. So she said that was a total surprise for her because this group of Tibetan artists just came with their artworks and then they set up these bamboos during the sunset.
They also set up,
and that the lanterns were hanging on each end of this cross, and as the night fell, the lanterns lit up.
Wow. Yeah, that was a very beautiful piece. They also laid gold, deep yellow scarves along the edge of the water and had a prayer ceremony there at the opening of the whole event 3 days earlier. So there was so much happening, and it had to happen in a very sort of constricted amount of time, whereas in Chengdu we could spread out and, you know, go on for 2 weeks. But in Lhasa we definitely couldn't do it that way.
Again, in terms of this archive and what we found very interesting about the archive, and again somewhat unique, although doing archival work, and what's wonderful is that you find all sorts of people who seem to have somewhat disappeared from the art scene, and we're really delighted to have the opportunity to bring them back and make them visible again. Now here's a work that many people who've studied contemporary Chinese art recognize. It's by Yin Shoujian, where she takes sets of shoes and she fills them with yak butter along the edges of the river. This is a very well-known piece, again done at this same time. An important women artist. Now here is a piece by Zhang Lei, who is sitting in our audience. When I first saw the archive, I didn't know who Zhang Lei was. And we thought this piece was extremely beautiful and extremely moving. Actually, the first time I encountered your work is when we archived Joan Cohen's archive. And she had some images, and then saw again images in Betsy's archive. And so now, tonight, for the first time, we're meeting each other, which is really
exciting.
Very exciting, extremely exciting. You can tell us a little bit about this piece? Yes, don't be shy. Women have got to learn to use their voice. Don't be shy.
My English really not
doesn't matter. We don't care.
It's okay.
My Chinese is terrible, so we're even.
Betsy opened the door for many artists to understand art with religions, natures, and the moment. Also, the human rights all shocked for me. We living in Beijing, we just started about modern art, and come to Tibetan, I really deeply understand. Especially I use the material is the hada, the silk for the Buddhas. This is middle of the works. Actually, later we finish over all the land. Was for the respecting. For me, it's the first time the nature with arts, how it's beautiful together. Yeah. Sorry.
That's okay. No, great. You did great.
Great. Absolutely great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And there's another artist named Zhang Xin.
Yeah. This piece is called
Sowing seeds. This is outside the army base. They're army based at every bridge, a big army. And she was throwing dirt over the road and throwing the seeds into it. And a lot of people came to help her, a lot of the other artists. And it's very radical. Very radical.
Next. It's another piece. This is the Tibetan woman artist.
Suri Lamu. This piece is called Water Burial.
Yeah.
I think this is a dead fish, and then she made a ceremony, like a ritual.
A wrap.
And then she I think there's candles she light up later and to have the ceremony of these dead fishes.
Which is in a way a gesture towards the sky burials, which are the traditional burials in Tibet. Here's another. This is in Chengdu. This is the final work, or one of the
One
final
of the
works?
people who stepped forward and wanted to be part of the project was Ceci Woo, and she's an architect, so she built this boat for us to drift away. That was amazing.
And the other thing, and I think they've already noticed it and mentioned, is that as opposed to being surreptitious, secretive, outside the mainstream, in an isolated place, this work was very much celebrated and embraced by the community, but also by the establishment of that time. So I thought that we're towards the end here, but here's a TV program that talks about it. This is a small clip. It goes on for a very long time. It's like a TV documentary in a regular program about women and family and
society.
But this is on TV.
Society, family, and women.
But it is such a period
观众朋友
piece.
们晚上好，欢迎收看今天晚上的社会家庭女。在我们享受工业化和现代化给我们带来的种种好处的同时，不得不承认，我们生存的这个环境已经受到了日益严重的污染。其中非常重要的一点就是水资源的污染。
So he was
然而
saying,
亡羊补牢，犹未晚也。
we
因
need
此，
to
我们有了
pay
淮河
extra
流域的治理
attention，to the
有了防止
pollution
太
of
湖
our
水污染的
earth.
总体规划，也有了我们成都市的1号工程——府南河综合整治。 这项造福子孙的浩大工程，不但吸引了我们成都人极大的热情，也引起了全国乃至一些外国友人的关心。今天我们要向您介绍一位这样的美国女艺术家——贝特西·达蒙女士。府南河作为我们成都的母亲河，在静静地流淌了几千年之后，终于热闹了起来。当本市1号工程府南河综合整治已经成为成都市民生活中一件重大的事情，关于它的新闻也就越来越多。其中最有意思的莫过于去年夏天的那场街上行为艺术展。
So here you have Daguan Yu's piece.
而更
Yes,
引人注
and
目
they
的是
also
那
use
活动的发
performance
起人与
art,
参与
like
者
the。term performance art.
环府南河一江清流是每个蓉城人的心愿，也同样引起了一帮美国友人的共鸣。
怀揣着同样的心愿，一项清蒸换沙活动让人们看到了希望。请看报道。
7月29日下
So
午，
here they
中
are
原
in
来
the
自
water,
中国
washing
的浣纱
silk
小
in the
姐，
water.
手持洁白的锦缎，在锦江河中做传统的漂洗表演，引起蓉城人极大的兴趣。他知道成都的府南河治理工程是成都市政府的1号工程，是一项利在千秋、功在当代的保护水环境的大事。
今天上午，水的保护者行为艺术活动在公园继续进行。
经20名中美艺术家联合开展的以府南河水质保护为主题的行为艺术宣传活动，今天在本市继续进行。艺术家们与过往行人一样，用刷子刷洗这些河治的冰块，也唤起人们对府南河的环境保护意识。
另外，他们还在一些河中排水口处挂上一条洁白的布，
This is
让
Betsy's
污水
piece
冲刷。
herself. Her own piece.
Last summer, this is Keepers of Water 在成都有一个水的保护者的展览。这次展览的主题呢是府南河与环境保护。这个展览中，您的展品的名字叫做瀑布，是吗？In this exhibition, you named waterfall, isn't it?
Oh, I put a white, all the places that the sewer is going into the river, I put a white piece of cloth just to show, to mark all the places that the river's getting dirty.
What mean did you want to explain?
Just to demonstrate, I mean, people don't look at this river anymore and they don't notice anything. So all these art pieces are
Ways to raise visibility and raise awareness around.
I have no time to make an art piece. The Chinese artists all said, "Here, we'll do this for you."
That was done by other. It was a collaboration.
It was a
real
collaboration. Yeah,
A real
totally.
collaboration. Okay, next.
This is the image of the construction of Water Living Garden. So Water Living Garden is like a result of 1995 Keepers of Waters. So this garden was completed in 1998 as an extension, also as a result of this.
Well, they took me to see the government plans for the river, and I really was impressed. It was impressive, and so they made all parkland, 19 kilometers, both sides of the river, all parkland, There is nothing like that in the United States. It could have been a movie theater, a restaurant, a hotel. And I said, why don't you make a park to teach your citizens how nature cleans water? And they said, can you do that? Well, we were meeting on a sidewalk, okay? Nobody, I guess they didn't want anybody to know we had this meeting. And I nodded, and they said, talk for 2 minutes, fast. And then they said, we want you to do that and give up the performance stuff. And I went home and was jumping up and down, like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And actually I decided that we had to finish the performance, that there would be no integrity in all the work everyone had done if I had said we're abandoning that. And also the Living Water Garden would not have happened. So when I told the government my decision, they said they were really sorry to hear that they thought performance art and public work was a waste of time and money, but they would watch me very carefully, and if they liked what happened, they would invite me back. So they liked what happened. It's short.
And they invited you back to create this intervention in a larger government park project.
It was the largest piece of land they had. It had already been designed to blueprint. There is no government in the world who would ever, and especially not in the United States, change their mind when they've already paid for the blueprint. But they did. And then they asked me who I needed to collaborate with, and so we went forward. And it was really hard and really amazing. And you can see, if you look up Living Water Garden, it's Living Water Garden. You'll see lots and lots of pictures, or on my website, but also on the web are pictures that I don't even have. And people still go there to learn. Like, they're taught about this in architecture school now, and they go to the park to learn how to do it. Even though it's gone through many people who hated it, mayors who liked it, mayors who hated it.
Okay, well, so for now we just conclude quickly. For more information, you can go to the archives website.
Yeah, we just turned it live last night.
Cici just turned it live last night, and here's some of the examples of other images and work on the website. So
yeah, we have so much more materials actually in the online, and we really welcome all the researchers to have access to the archive. Yeah, and we will keep updating.
Right. So anyway, thank
Bravo,
you very much. So really, we want you all to take, next 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever, but let's say 15 minutes to ask questions. And if you don't ask a question, I'm going to call on you to ask a question. Seriously.
All questions are good.
All questions are good. Yep.
Well, thank you for the presentation. I think this archive is really fascinating. And are those videos going to be uploaded too?
Yeah, there are more videos. So there's one video I think from CCTV.
Oh, that's fantastic. I mean, it's quite fascinating that the TV are so generous in reporting on the incidents. It's actually, to me, that's almost like the dream of a lot of public art who, that want to engage the, lay people's dream. It's like the people actually participating. I guess I have two questions. One is how do all these art, what is your role in, like, quote unquote, catalyzing these pieces? Like when, say in Xiuzhen, when she created a piece of the sky, did the conception happen within like a meeting? Like how does that work as an initiative? And I guess the second question is, seeing all these wonderful pieces, what really struck me is there seems to be a imbalance in how famous these pieces are. For example, some of those pieces really well known among the contemporary art circle. It was exhibited at Guggenheim, at the Met, at really many major exhibitions. But then I also see so many wonderful pieces that I've never seen before. And there's this just quite grave imbalance of like some work being super famous and some work being, so far I think they're critically just as wonderful, but don't get exposed much. I mean, I guess this is one of the reasons Asian art archivists doing all these work. But do you have any?
Well,
opinion on that?
I would say I needed to have published something about it right away, and I'm really bad about that. So I'm very thankful to the archive. I mean, and also right on the heels, then I was into making the park, and then into the next thing. Like I was taken to Beijing to meet one of the most famous people in Beijing ever, and get a job. And so life just rolled on really fast. But it is the way of the art world that people pick somebody out. And it's wrong. It's actually wrong that people love separating you out from a group. Okay, so suddenly you're full blown, this person by yourself, you did this, instead of showing that it actually within the container of what happened. Like I would throw out ideas. I'm an ideal little machine in many ways, but the collective energy of minds together in one place creates the possibility of all these things that people didn't actually think about. And that's what we don't acknowledge. And somehow you have to be this artist who, emerged out of nothing, especially if you're in the United States. So the power of public art or the collective gets diminished because, and this will be a very political statement, there are reasons why the popes like to control the arts, or the dictators in a country control the artists. Because you know what happened around Tiananmen when they made the Statue of Liberty? Like art really motivates people. It inspires people. It gets people engaged. It has that power. And here, also in the States, it's very shoved now to the sides. As an artist, you can do anything, and it won't have very much impact. So that, and there's now forces that are trying to change that, but they will again try and disintegrate that. So that goes on. That's part of what government does all over the world. And so there's that separating, and then curators play into that. The art world plays into it because they found out they can get, Songdong's piece is really beautiful. He made this beautiful object. He does this beautiful symbol. It's very visual. So, and it doesn't kick a lot of butt. And so then that gets shown a lot. That happens. There's other pieces in there like what Daigong you did was amazing, but much more kind of hardcore commentary on the situation than the metaphor that Songdong, which is also it's all valuable. But I'm speaking as an artist when I talk to you. I think about this a lot, and how we disempower the artists. And so, so often I was told, corporations want to buy artwork that has no meaning, zero meaning. That's what they want. And
it's also very important to point out, and this is not just China, this is the United States as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Is that there's a difference between visibility of artists who are based in Beijing versus visibility of artists who are based in Chengdu or Xi'an or Chongqing for that matter. And that is why many artists migrate to
New York.
I asked just the other day, I asked Cici, we were talking about this exact thing. I said, Cici, how many artists do you know who are based in Cincinnati?
Mm-hmm.
Not that I would compare Chengdu to Cincinnati. Or my brother lives in Knoxville. There's a whole artist community in Knoxville, Tennessee. Do we know who they are?
No.
So I think there's the reality is that the art world, the art media is based in Beijing, and so artists who are based in Beijing and have connections in Beijing will tend to be more visible. That's not the only reason. But I think that's a very major reason. It's one of the things that we're very interested in this archive, not because there's a lot of artists in this archive we've never seen before or didn't know before, There's much beautiful work being done in this archive. The fact that it was very engaged inside the community and embraced by the community is very unusual. It also runs against a certain narrative that we hear about Chinese art, particularly art of this sort. But also, what we really feel, and we're as culpable, as guilty as anybody else, is that we as art historians and we as researchers and we as archivists are reinscribing or restating or reinforcing a narrative that has been around for a long time. And that we have to be critical ourselves of the narrative that we are celebrating and look for the gaps, the disappearances, the vulnerabilities, the problems in those narratives. And we all know that one of them is the lack of women, the visibility around women, visibility around regional cities in China, around different ethnicities in China. It's almost, it's almost empty. It's a huge gap. And our job as people who've actually aided and abetted the creating these master narratives or reinforcing master narratives is now to look very critically at what we have done and what those master narratives are saying and how we can disturb that, how we can question that, how we can offer information, create visibility around where visibility has been lacking, and invite all of you to do more research on this. There are so many stories. Go back to the idea of the storyteller. There are so many stories that haven't been told, or have been told and never recorded.
Like once upon a time, in many cultures, like I would research this, like the artist would be the central communicator. Like maybe they'd create the language which would communicate health issues. There's in Lhasa, India, the women made those paintings. What are the stories? Where is the imagery? But in recent history, I think it's a lot about. I view it economically or materially, or the control of materialism is the artist is over here as in somehow over here, not in the central of the community as a force. That, and let's face it, creativity is the heartbeat of every society. Now, where is it going? It's going, it can go into banking, it can go making airplanes, it can go into Walt Disney. Tools. It's everywhere, right? So when you separate out all the different art forms for whatever reasons, and this place sells only this and this sells only that, then there's a kind of aspect about creativity being actually the core of community that's lost. And then you lose, whatever artists haven't sort of fit into a particular slot.
There are other questions, because I know a lot of people, we're running over our limit.
Yeah.
Yes, sir?
I just am curious, how did you mentioned that was a certain amount of money, how did you fundraise in the US and then bring it over there? How did that come
It's a really strange and magical story. I after the conference in 1993, where we brainstormed, they wanted me to come back and do an activist project in China. And we brainstormed something called Living Yangtze. The WWF has that. But so I went home and wrote grants. No foundation would fund something like this in China. Because it's a communist country, all the foundations, guidelines forbid that. And I was broke, and I got a phone call from a woman. She did not tell me her name. She did not tell me why. She said, "I'm thinking of funding you." Now, I have no idea how she got to me or through which of the grants I wrote. I wanted $30,000. And something told me to answer her quickly. And under 20,000, I said, I need 15,000. And my friends raised another $8,000 or $9,000. And I went to China.
And she gave you the money.
She gave me the money. And never told me her name. Or even what for. I just ended up spilling my guts to her about wanting to do this project in China. And I was doing stuff in Minnesota, but it was very, very hard. And so
You fundraised with your friends?
And I had almost $25,000 in a money belt around my waist when I went to China. I also went to the headwaters of the Yangtze River and hitchhiked to Lhasa with Zhu Xiaofeng illegally on a Mack truck.
That is a story for another time, but it's amazing. And I was just looking at the map, and she starts in Gommen, and she goes all the way to Chengdu to Gommen to Lhasa. I couldn't even believe my eyes when you think about it. You did it in a truck with dirt roads at that time.
And I had been sick, and the drivers were like, "Your mother's going to die up here," because my son was with me. Anyway, I don't think of myself as that brave, but I did that.
One more question?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm just curious about the age demographic of the participating artists. So, like, approximately what age are the different artists who are contributing?
I think they were mostly in their 30s.
They're all from the same generation.
Yeah.
Yeah, like peers.
At what age would they have been? So Interdisciplinary was in the 60s.
Late 20s.
Late 20s, early 30s. Because
Yeah.
she would have been she would have been
Like
born in the 60s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like when Interdisciplinary participated, she just had her first solo show in Beijing. And then she got kind of...
And what's really interesting is that no one actually ever knows how they got there. I mean,
Yeah.
Dai Guanyu has his story, In Shou-jun has his story, Betsy sort of like all these people came together and
I got back from the headwaters of the Yangtze and there was a gang of artists there.
I mean, Dai Guanyu is very, very involved, extremely
Yeah.
involved, but when we interviewed In Shou-jun, she thinks she got an invitation from Betsy, but Betsy doesn't remember.
She got an invitation to go to Lhasa. I invited very specific people to Lhasa, but many more people came. But for that, I think she got it through the woman in Shanghai, the writer.
Oh,
I think Zhu Xiaofeng contacted her, and I think he contacted.
And the writer's name was?
Yu Leiqing.
Was it-
She is a critic.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a writer.
So I'm not sure, and I didn't have enough Chinese to ask anybody or any time.
And most of the artists, they cannot, they were in this early stage of practicing contemporary art. But then there are also artists not from China, like they're from Switzerland or America. Also,
And they were people that
They came late though. They weren't in on all the discussions. Beth and Chris were not in on it. Laurie came, but Chris came with me, Chris Caskey, and she was a very big help. I knew I needed an assistant. I did all the filming in Chengdu that wasn't done by the TV stations. So in Lhasa, somebody came and filmed. So, because I just brought this little camera and I thought, oh my God, I have to do this. So in between everything else, I would pick up my camera and try and do something. But I'm not a filmmaker.
And one last one, Lulu.
I'm so amazed to see that this project, this is such an activist and conceptual art project, but you got so many support from local governments and participation from the local people and even very positive media coverage. I wonder, for one thing, how did you manage to do that? For the other, does it have anything to do with the situation in that place at that time, and is it still possible for any?
It had to do with that Sichuan has its own mind, and for many times, because it's surrounded on three sides by mountains, they have a certain isolation and independence of mind, but also they had a green plan that the government opposed, so they decided to fund. Central government opposed the green plan, the 5-year plan, and they decided to fund it themselves. So up on the walls of the office of the man who directed that, who I became very close friends with, was every single school and everybody who had ever given, 1,000 yuan, 5,000 yuan, 10,000 yuan. And I don't know how they ended up funding it all, but that's what they had to do. So this was basically seen, I think, after much, you can imagine the debates they must have gone through in their brains to decide to let us do this. And I never, I would go out on my bicycle at 6 a.m. Little butterfly would sit on the handlebars Well, they knew every place I went. They knew where I peed. They knew who gave me a newspaper. They could tell me exactly where I had been that day. So I was followed very closely, and I was also researched very closely. And after the Living Water Garden was done, they disclosed all that to me. Like I said, why? Why? Why did you allow this to happen? Why did you dare to do it? And the man who dared to do it came under great scrutiny, the Chinese man. The mayor said to him, "Are you willing to go to jail for this woman?" Now that was not around the performance, but it was around the Living Water Garden. But I'm sure they had the same conversation around the performances. Are you willing to go to jail for this idea? And this man said yes. The mayor said he wasn't. But this man took everything under his wing. So same with the EPA office. They must have said, we are willing to do this. She's not here to do anything bad. She's here to do something good. Why should we not do it? Because that's what they asked. What reason do we have to not do this?
I think
yeah.
We have somebody from Chengdu in the back. In the back.
Yeah.
Hi.
I want to share my feeling because I think the keepers of the water is very important for.
Say your name again.
Li Jie.
And Li Jie is here on an ACC Asia Cultural Council fellowship as well, and is a curator at museum which is called
A4 Art Museum.
A4 Art Museum.
Yeah, because I think this program prove more things in Chengdu. For example, more and more performance artists living and work in Chengdu after the program.
Yeah.
And every year they make the performance festival in Chengdu after that.
Under the name of Keepers of the Water.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
yep.
They sent me those.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. Yeah. And another thing is the government think the art can prove the people to think about the I think the public work together. So they make more and more public museum and art center after that. And our museum is also designed by a very famous architecture from USA.
Who's that?
Anthony Product. And finally, we make a big lake around our museum. And the beginning of the thinking is about the keeper of the water. So I think, and more cities government in China to know about art can change the people's mind of the city. So I think it's very, very important.
Well, thank you.
And also your beautiful park is my favorite in Chengdu.
Oh.
And when I was a child, I want to play in the park every month. Yes.
That's a wonderful story. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Well, the park just pulses with life, and it's become my main understanding of what we have to do now. What we have to do now. And artists can play a huge role, and we're discovering around the world that they are playing a huge role. So, because the role we get to play is we are not in a box that has to do this. And we've made too many boxes. We can bring together the different boxes. We can sew together things that have to be sewn together. we can do this. And I actually think we must do this now, that because, you know, this place we live in is in peril. Everywhere world. There's not one country we can blame or should point a finger at. Not one, ever. And we do that a lot, but we can't do that anymore. And I believe that as artists, we can really invite the engineer and the biologist and the citizens to come together to put it back together. And we have to. So that's what I learned from the Living Water Garden. When we saw it working, because there were different construction teams, and really they didn't think it would work. Like we had a 12-hour meeting once and it went till 9 o'clock at night till we all agreed it could work, and we're dancing together. And we were standing there, and everybody has their fingers crossed, or they're like this when we first turned on the heart, literally in prayer. And it worked. It didn't leak, and it didn't spill anything, and it actually worked. And we went, oh, you know. And then, within a short period of time, kingfishers were there feeding, and they're a sign of a healthy environment. And so, it's not that hard to create a healthy environment, and it's not about separating everything. It's about connecting everything. And you can use that metaphor for society, for our countries, for everything we do. Oh, okay. Done.
On that note, and I hope everybody's inspired, we're going to give Betsy a huge round of applause.